October 14, 1942. North Atlantic dawn. The convoy FS 723 ploughed through slate-grey waters 60 miles east of the Orkney Islands. 23 merchant vessels in tight formation, their silhouettes breaking the horizon line like jagged teeth. The weather had turned overnight, a blessing for the convoy escort, which consisted of just 2 destroyers and 3 converted fishing trawlers. Among them sailed HMT Ambrose, formerly the fishing vessel Northern Star, her once vibrant blue hull now painted battleship grey. Standing on her bow, Chief Petty Officer Ian McCallum squinted through the morning mist, his right hand instinctively checking the mechanism on the modified 4-inch deck gun. The salt-weathered skin around his eyes crinkled as he scanned the horizon methodically. 38 years at sea had given McCallum an almost preternatural sense for danger. 26 of those years spent on fishing trawlers in these very waters. He had learned to read the North Sea like a book, its moods, its patterns, its secrets. Con, bow. Something breaking the surface at green 140, he called through the voice tube. Could be nothing, could be something. Through his binoculars, McCallum tracked the disturbance. A momentary flash of metal, then nothing. The convoy continued its crawl eastward. The radio operator's voice crackled over the internal communications system. Bridge, radio, destroyer Valkyrie reports possible contact. All vessels maintain formation. McCallum felt his stomach tighten. He knew what was coming. At precisely 0627 hours, the night's blissful silence shattered. A merchant vessel 200 yards to starboard erupted into flames, a geyser of fire, metal, and steam. The concussive force of the explosion rocked the Ambrose, sending McCallum sprawling against the gun mount. Torpedo in the water! The lookout's voice carried over the chaos. Within seconds, the previously peaceful sea transformed into a maelstrom of activity. The convoy escort vessels frantically altered course, depth charges rolling off their stern racks into the churning waters. McCallum steadied himself against the gun mount and stared at the burning merchant vessel. He'd seen this scenario play out too many times over the past 3 years, the Wolfpack tactic. One U-boat would strike, creating chaos, while others waited in the periphery for their opportunity. But something was different this time. As dawn fully broke over the horizon, McCallum spotted a telltale oil slick and bubbles moving away from the attack site. "He's running shallow," McCallum muttered. "They the bastards running shallow." That moment of insight, born from decades of tracking fish through these same waters, would soon change the course of the Atlantic War. The Royal Naval Patrol Service had pressed hundreds of fishing trawlers into service since the outbreak of war. Their crews, mostly civilian fishermen turned reluctant warriors, were thrown into an unfamiliar battle against Germany's deadly U-boat fleet. The converted trawlers were equipped with depth charges, ASDIC sonar systems, and deck guns, but they remained woefully inadequate against the U-boats' tactical advantage. The Wolfpack strategy had devastated Atlantic shipping. Hundreds of thousands of tons sent to the ocean floor each month. At the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Division in London, Commander James Prentice studied the grim statistics on the report before him. Another 7 merchant vessels lost in the past 48 hours. The escort vessels, including the converted trawlers, had responded according to protocol, dropping patterns of depth charges where the U-boats were suspected to be, but the success rate remained abysmal. "The problem, gentlemen," Prentice addressed the officers gathered in the wood-panelled conference room, "is that we're always reacting. By the time our escort vessels reach the attack site, the U-boat is long gone." The static anti-submarine nets protecting harbours like Scapa Flow and Sydney had proven effective when properly deployed and manned, but they were fixed defences. The mobile convoy battles taking place in the open Atlantic required a different approach. Back aboard the Ambrose, now docked for repairs at Rosyth Naval Base, Ian McCallum sat in the cramped crew quarters, sketching on the back of a nautical chart. The previous day's attack had cost the convoy 3 merchant vessels and 27 sailors. No confirmed U-boat kills. "What are you working on there, Mac?" asked Lieutenant Commander William Harrison, the Ambrose's commanding officer, as he ducked through the low doorway. McCallum looked up, his weathered face pensive. "Something's been bothering me, sir. These U-boats, they're behaving like mackerel schools." "Mackerel?" Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Yes, sir. They travel in groups, attack in coordinated patterns, and, most importantly, they surface frequently in certain conditions." McCallum pushed his sketch across the small table. "We're trying to hunt them with depth charges that barely work half the time. But what if we could trap them instead, like we used to trap fish?" Harrison studied the drawing, a modified fishing trawl net design with reinforced steel mesh and flotation devices. "The Admiralty has anti-submarine nets protecting the harbours. MAC. They're stationary defences. This would be different, sir." McCallum's voice grew animated. "Mobile, deployable from vessels like ours. We could create a trap that moves with the convoy. The Admiralty would never approve such an unconventional approach." Harrison sighed, though his eyes remained fixed on the drawing. "With respect, sir, conventional approaches are getting our boys killed." The fatal flaw in current anti-submarine warfare was painfully clear. The hunters had become the hunted, with merchant convoys serving as bait while U-boats retained the tactical advantage of surprise and mobility. What McCallum proposed was radical, turning the trawler's fishing heritage into a weapon of war. February 1943. The maintenance workshop at Rosyth Naval Base hummed with activity as McCallum worked late into the night. The North Sea winter howled outside, rattling the windows of the converted warehouse. Inside, under the harsh glow of electric lamps, a small team of former fishermen and naval engineers huddled around workbenches strewn with technical drawings and steel cable samples. The standard anti-submarine net uses a 2.5-inch circumference steel wire with a breaking strain of nearly 20 tons, explained Lieutenant James Blackwood, a naval engineer assigned to McCallum's project. "But your design calls for something more flexible." McCallum nodded, his calloused fingers running over a sample of cable. "The standard nets are designed to be stationary, anchored to the seabed or suspended from buoys. What we need is something that can be deployed rapidly from a moving vessel, something that can expand like a fishing trawl." The prototype took shape over 6 weeks of clandestine work. By day, the Ambrose continued its escort duties. By night, McCallum and his team modified a standard fishing trawl with reinforced steel mesh woven into a pattern that could withstand the force of a submarine hull while remaining light enough to be deployed quickly. "The Germans have adapted," McCallum explained to Harrison one evening as they examined the prototype laid out on the workshop floor. Their Type 7 U-boats now carry net-cutting equipment on their bows to deal with harbour defences. But they're designed for stationary nets, vertical barriers. This design approaches from behind and envelops. The technical challenges were immense. The net needed to be strong enough to entangle a 750-ton submarine travelling at 7 knots underwater, yet flexible enough to be deployed from the relatively small deck of a trawler. It required custom-designed winches and a modified stern ramp normally used for hauling in fish catches. On March 7, 1943, Commander Prentice arrived from London to inspect the prototype. His initial skepticism gave way to cautious interest as McCallum demonstrated the deployment mechanism using a scaled model. "If this works as you claim, Chief McCallum, it could provide our escort vessels with a much-needed offensive capability," Prentice admitted, "but you understand the risks. Testing this in combat conditions would place your vessel and its crew in extraordinary danger." McCallum's face remained impassive. "With respect, Commander, we're already in extraordinary danger every time we sail with a convoy. At least this gives us a fighting chance. The greatest risk wasn't technical, but doctrinal. Naval warfare had rigid protocols developed over centuries. What McCallum proposed was fishing tactics adapted to warfare, a notion that many career naval officers found almost insulting. Some suggested that McCallum's idea represented a desperate gamble by civilian sailors out of their depth in naval combat. Commander Prentice, however, recognized the innovation's potential. "The U-boat threat has forced us to consider unconventional approaches," he told the Admiralty Board in London. His Chief Petty Officer McCallum's background as a North Atlantic fisherman gives him insights our naval architects might miss. After heated debate, the Admiralty granted permission for a field test, though the authorization came with a terse addendum. This approval does not constitute endorsement of non-standard tactical approaches. As the modified net was loaded aboard the Ambrose in late March 1943, McCallum oversaw every detail of the installation. The massive steel winches, salvaged from a damaged whaling vessel, groaned under the weight of the reinforced cable. The deployment mechanism, a hybrid of fishing trawl systems and naval engineering, occupied nearly a third of the vessel's aft deck. "She won't win any beauty contests," McCallum remarked to Harrison as they surveyed the completed modifications. "Beauty isn't what we're after," Harrison replied. "Just results." April 18, 1943. The waters south of Iceland. Convoy on 5. 38 merchant vessels ploughed through heavy seas, their formation tight despite the challenging conditions. 6 escort vessels maintained a protective screen, 2 destroyers, 3 corvettes, and the modified trawler HMT Ambrose. McCallum stood on the bridge wing, his eyes trained on the convoy's port flank, where the merchant vessels were most vulnerable. The Ambrose had been assigned this position specifically to test McCallum's fishing net theory, as the Admiralty had dismissively termed it. ASDIC contact, bearing 180 range 800 yards, moving left to right across our stern, called the sonar operator through the voice tube. Depth approximately 60 feet. Harrison turned to McCallum. "Your moment of truth, Chief." McCallum nodded and moved swiftly to the aft control station. The modified winch system had been tested twice during the journey, but never in combat conditions. The engineering team stood ready, tension evident in their rigid postures. "All hands to action stations," Harrison ordered through the ship's communication system. "Prepare for anti-submarine operation." The Ambrose broke formation, swinging in a wide arc that positioned her 300 yards behind the contact's projected path. McCallum watched the ASDIC readings relayed to the aft station, calculating speed and trajectory with the instinctive skill of a man who had spent decades predicting the movement of fish schools. "Deploy on my mark," he called to the winch operators. 3, 2, 1, mark. The massive winch drums began to turn, unreeling the reinforced steel mesh net into the churning wake. The Ambrose shuddered as the full weight of the apparatus transferred from ship to sea. Within 40 seconds, the net was fully deployed, a lethal curtain 120 feet wide and 80 feet deep, suspended between weighted cables and flotation devices. "Net deployed, sir," McCallum reported to Harrison. "Now we wait." The Ambrose maintained position, engines at minimal power to keep the net expanded behind her. Minutes crawled by, the tension on the bridge palpable. "My contact continuing on course, speed 6 knots, range now 200 yards and closing to our position," reported the ASDIC operator. McCallum's eyes never left the tension gauges connected to the main cables. The moment of intersection was approaching, the submarine unknowingly heading toward the invisible trap. At exactly 14:37 hours, the port side tension gauge spiked dramatically. Seconds later, the starboard gauge followed suit. The entire vessel vibrated as something massive strained against the steel mesh barrier trailing behind them. "We've got him!" McCallum shouted. "Full power to winches! Reel in!" The winch motors screamed in protest as they began the process of hauling in the net, and whatever was caught within it. The Ambrose's deck tilted noticeably as the immense weight transferred back to the vessel. Bridge, Aztec. Contact is rising rapidly. Depth now 40 feet. 30 feet. Harrison grabbed the engine room communicator. All stop. Prepare for possible surface contact. 300 yards behind the Ambrose, the sea began to boil. Air bubbles erupted across the surface, followed by the unmistakable dark shape of a submarine conning tower breaking through the waves. "U-boat surfacing directly astern," called the lookout. Through his binoculars, McCallum could see the submarine was caught in the reinforced mesh, its bow and forward diving planes thoroughly entangled. The U-boat's diesel engines had engaged, standard procedure when emergency surfacing, but the vessel could barely move, trapped like a mackerel in a trawler's net. "Signal the destroyer, Valkyrie," Harrison ordered. "We have a live one." Within minutes, the destroyer had arrived on scene, its 4.7-inch guns trained on the stricken U-boat. The submarine's crew emerged from the conning tower with hands raised. 27 German sailors captured without a single shot fired. The U-boat was identified as U-573, a Type 7IC submarine that had been responsible for sinking 4 merchant vessels in the previous month. Its capture intact, with codebooks, encryption materials, and technical documentation, represented an intelligence windfall beyond measure. As McCallum watched the German crew being transferred to the destroyer, he felt no triumph, only the grim satisfaction of a job well done. The fishing technique that had sustained generations of his family had been transformed into an instrument of war. "The net needs reinforcement along the upper edge," he noted to Harrison, already thinking of improvements. "And the winch motors need more torque." Harrison shook his head in amazement. "We just captured an intact U-boat, Mac. That's never been done before with a trawler. Take a moment to appreciate it." McCallum finally allowed himself a small smile. "Aye, sir. It worked just as I thought it would. They're just like mackerel after all." By August 1943, 12 trawlers in the Royal Naval Patrol Service had been equipped with McCallum's modified net system. The Admiralty, initially skeptical, had been convinced by the capture of U-573 and the subsequent entrapment of 2 more submarines in the North Atlantic. The tactic was particularly effective against U-boats attempting to infiltrate convoys at night while running on the surface to recharge batteries. The quiet approach of the trawlers, combined with their unexpectedly lethal capability, created a psychological advantage that disrupted the Germans' wolf-pack tactics. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet, noted in his war diary on September 12, 1943, "Reports indicate the British have deployed a new type of mobile entrapment device from converted fishing vessels. 3 boats lost in circumstances suggesting mechanical failure rather than depth charge attack. Further investigation required." The Germans adapted quickly, as they always did, equipping their submarines with improved sonar to detect approaching vessels and enhanced net-cutting apparatus. But the psychological damage had been done. U-boat commanders became increasingly hesitant to maintain close contact with convoys, fearing entrapment by vessels they had previously considered minimal threats. McCallum's innovation earned him the Distinguished Service Medal and promotion to warrant officer. More importantly, it sparked a wave of tactical innovations from other civilian sailors serving in the Royal Naval Patrol Service. By early 1944, as the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic turned decisively in the Allies' favor, McCallum was transferred to an Admiralty Technical Division tasked with developing anti-submarine technology. His experience as a fisherman, once considered irrelevant to naval warfare, became his most valuable asset. After the war, McCallum returned to fishing, captaining a new trawler built in the shipyards of Aberdeen. The reinforced net technology he had developed found peacetime application in deep-water fishing operations, allowing for more selective harvesting techniques that reduced bycatch. On a cold December morning in 1976, now long retired, McCallum stood at Aberdeen Harbour watching the modern fishing fleet preparing to depart. A young naval cadet approached, introduced by a mutual acquaintance. "Now, sir, I've studied your anti-submarine tactics at Dartmouth," the cadet said with obvious admiration. "They teach us that your innovations saved thousands of lives during the Atlantic campaign." McCallum shook his head slightly. "I just applied what I knew about fishing to a different problem. The real innovation was the Admiralty's willingness to listen to an old fisherman." Years later, a small display in the Imperial War Museum would commemorate the Fishermen's Navy and their contribution to Allied victory. Among the artifacts, a section of reinforced steel mesh from McCallum's original prototype, alongside a photograph of HMT Ambrose with its unusual stern configuration. The placard beneath it read simply, "Warrant Officer Ian McCallum's modified fishing net captured 3 German U-boats intact and forced tactical changes that significantly reduced convoy losses in the North Atlantic, 1943-1945. His design demonstrated how civilian expertise directly applied to naval challenges helped turn the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. Naval Warfare Assessment, 5721C, Admiralty Archives, declassified 1972. The application of fishing technology to anti-submarine warfare represents one of the most successful adaptations of civilian expertise to combat operations in naval history. The initiative demonstrated that effective countermeasures could emerge from practical experience rather than theoretical tactical development, a lesson that continues to influence naval operation planning.